At a family barbecue, my grandma yelled, "Your $14,000 car's paid off." But I never bought a car and then. At what was supposed to be a simple family barbecue, Grandma Ruth loudly announced that my car loan was fully paid off, $14,000, and said I was worth every penny. I blinked, confused, and finally told her I didn't even own a car. The table went silent. My sister Brooke walked in holding a set of shiny new car keys, smiling like nothing happened. Everyone else avoided eye contact. Mom kept slicing watermelon. Dad stared at his plate, and Cousin Tyler stayed quiet. The silence told me this wasn't an accident. They had taken out a loan in my name without telling me, thinking I wouldn't notice or would just accept it like always. Later, when everyone was inside watching TikTok videos on the big TV I had bought last Christmas, I opened my loan app. There it was, approved, $14,000, all in my name. I closed the app, screenshot the page, and looked back up to see Grandma Ruth coming toward me without a smile. She pulled a thick yellow folder from her purse and slid it across the table silently. The folder sat on my kitchen counter untouched for 3 days. At night, unable to sleep, I finally opened it. Inside were contracts, dealership papers, and finance agreements, all with my name, but none of the signatures were mine. The last page showed a forged version of my signature, traced clumsily from an old internship form I'd signed years ago. Then I saw the pattern. It wasn't just the car loan. There was the utility bill from last fall I'd been charged twice for, the second streaming service my dad didn't know I was still paying for, and a $500 school deposit for my sister's kid that was never repaid. Every favor I'd quietly done had become an unspoken expectation. Every silence was permission. I wasn't family anymore. I was funding. I felt used financially and emotionally. And the worst part was knowing they knew exactly what they were doing. Grandma's folder held the proof: receipts, contracts, insurance papers, and pages of bold moves made without my consent. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the person who never made a scene. They assumed I'd keep paying, keep smiling, keep disappearing. Memories came flooding back. The birthday party I wasn't invited to, but my bank statement showed a $600 catering charge. The wedding where I paid for flowers but wasn't in the program. The group vacation where I covered the Airbnb and got a thank you text meant for someone else. All those moments fit together like pieces of a betrayal I never saw coming. They didn't love me less. They just valued what I gave more than who I was. And I let them. That night, I logged into every bank account and changed all the passwords, froze auto payments, and pulled my credit report. Then I called the dealership. "Hi," I said. "I think a car was purchased under my name without my consent." There was a pause. Then the rep asked, "Is your name Ryan?" "Yes." He sighed. "I figured you'd call." He warned that this kind of family fraud wasn't unusual and that the paperwork showed me as the legal owner. I didn't respond at first, just stared at the folder Grandma had pushed across the table like a verdict. My hands didn't shake, but inside, I was razor sharp. I wasn't looking for apologies. I wanted leverage. I was done being the quiet one. "You'll be picking up the car tonight," the rep said. I interrupted. "Pause that. Start the repossession process." "Understood." I hung up and opened my laptop. For the next several hours, I became exactly what they feared most: the quiet one who finally decided to make noise. After that night, everything changed. I started piecing together the full extent of what had been done behind my back. The folder Grandma Ruth slid across the table wasn't just about a car loan. It was the tip of a much bigger iceberg of financial betrayal. I spent hours combing through bills, receipts, and bank statements, tracing charges I hadn't authorized and loans I hadn't agreed to. Every single favor I'd quietly provided over the years had turned into an expectation, and every silence on my part was an open door for them to keep taking. The utilities bill from last fall that had 2 charges. The second streaming service I was still paying for even after removing their profiles. The school deposit for my nephew that was never reimbursed. All of it added up to a web of exploitation. I realized this wasn't about family helping family anymore. I had become a financial buffer, the person who absorbed their mistakes and debts while they carried on with their lives without a second thought. I didn't say a word at first. I wanted to be sure, wanted to confirm every detail before making a move. When I called the dealership to report the fraud, I wasn't surprised to hear that these kinds of family identity theft cases were common. The rep's calm voice barely hid the frustration of dealing with these kinds of situations regularly. He warned me that the loan was legally in my name, and cleaning it up would take time and patience. I hung up, staring at the folder as if it had suddenly become a blueprint for everything I had to fix. Over the next few days, I systematically started cutting the ties they'd been exploiting. I canceled shared streaming accounts, removed their profiles, and downgraded subscriptions to free versions to make sure I wasn't footing the bill for their entertainment anymore. Then, I took it further. I revoked access to the smart home devices I had set up for the family years ago, locking down the thermostat, cameras, and Wi-Fi that they had been using without a second thought. Their confusion and panic came fast. Texts and calls flooded in as they realized something was wrong. "Why is the Wi-Fi down?" my mom asked. "Why can't I access the cameras?" my sister texted. I didn't respond. I wasn't done yet. The biggest shock was when I logged into the lender's portal for the mortgage I had co-signed temporarily. My parents had assured me it was just until things stabilized, but I knew better. I started the process to remove myself from the loan, triggering an automatic review. Within hours, the bank called me, expressing concern that my parents might not qualify without me. I didn't hesitate to say I hoped they didn't qualify. A few days later, an updated loan estimate arrived in my inbox, showing their monthly payments would nearly double if I left. I didn't tell them. I wanted them to wake up to the reality they'd been avoiding for years. Digging deeper, I uncovered more. The storage unit lease I'd been paying for, holding half of the family's heirlooms, the business insurance for their home office under my name, the domain registration for my dad's side hustle. All of it was tied to me without my knowledge or consent. I revoked the hosting account, canceled auto renewals, and locked down every digital and financial door they had been slipping through. I wasn't stealing anything. I was reclaiming control. When I shut down their entire network infrastructure for the family's home business and my uncle's clinic, the system went dark instantly. There was no warning, no emotion, just digital severance. The notifications and frantic calls started pouring in immediately. My uncle left a voicemail filled with panic, unable to access files or log in anywhere. My dad sent a message accusing me of going too far and embarrassing the family. I didn't reply. This wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about boundaries they had ignored for far too long. Every attempt at manipulation, every guilt trip, every emotional plea was met with silence from me. I wasn't going to be the fixer or the family's scapegoat anymore. I gathered all the evidence, the forged contracts, loan approvals, financial statements, and screenshots of family group chats filled with anger and confusion, and sent them to a fraud investigator and my lawyer. I also forwarded the documents to the family accountant to protect myself legally. The backlash was immediate and fierce. My phone lit up nonstop with calls, texts, and voicemails from my sister, parents, and even Grandma Ruth. They accused me of tearing the family apart, being selfish, and destroying relationships over what they called misunderstandings. But I stayed silent, letting the facts speak louder than their words. As the days went by, the emotional attacks escalated. The family started spreading rumors, posting vague and hurtful messages on social media, trying to paint me as the villain. Despite this, I held my ground, knowing the truth was on my side. I wasn't looking for forgiveness or reconciliation yet. I just needed to protect myself and finally hold them accountable for the betrayal they had orchestrated. The quiet one had finally found her voice, and she wasn't backing down. Once I started pulling the plug on everything, the family's reaction was immediate and explosive. The digital lifelines they'd been casually abusing vanished overnight, and the silence that followed hit them harder than I could have predicted. My phone lit up with frantic messages and calls as they tried to figure out why the Wi-Fi was dead and why they couldn't access anything they'd come to depend on. My mom texted in near panic, asking why the internet was down when she needed it for work. My sister Brooke sent frantic messages about the cameras being inaccessible, desperate for me to fix whatever I'd broken. The truth was, I wasn't going to fix anything. For years, I had been their silent safety net, and now I had chosen to disappear from that role entirely. The family group chat quickly descended into chaos. The calm facade shattered as accusations, insults, and desperate pleas flooded in. They called me every name in the book: selfish, ungrateful, cruel, and worse. The messages twisted into a venomous storm of gaslighting and blame, with relatives demanding that I stop tearing the family apart over what they called misunderstandings. Some accused me of deliberately trying to ruin their lives, painting me as the villain in a story I never wanted to be a part of. I watched the carnage unfold from the sidelines, the names I had grown up with transforming into faceless aggressors wielding words like weapons. Despite the emotional barrage, I stayed silent. I knew that engaging would only feed the fire they were so desperate to stoke. My silence was a shield. Behind the scenes, I was meticulously gathering every scrap of proof I could find. I scanned through forged contracts, dealership documents, screenshots of venomous family chats where manipulation was rampant, and recordings of panicked voicemails from relatives. Every piece of evidence was organized, timestamped, and filed away with care. This wasn't a vendetta. It was a strategic move to protect myself from further damage and to prepare for whatever legal battles might come. I reached out to a trusted fraud investigator and my lawyer, handing over the entire dossier so they could be ready for what was next. I also forwarded the documents to the family accountant with a clear warning about the fraudulent loan, ensuring that even if my family tried to cover their tracks, I was protected. Despite the mounting evidence, my family doubled down on their efforts to isolate me. Rumors and lies spread quickly through mutual friends, social media, and distant relatives. My sister posted a tearful selfie on Instagram, with makeup streaked from crying and a caption about betrayal and heartbreak, instantly gathering sympathy and concern. The narrative being pushed was that I was the unstable, bitter sibling who had suddenly snapped and destroyed everything. I watched helplessly as the truth was buried beneath layers of deception and selective storytelling. People who didn't know the full story believed the lies, and the damage to my reputation was real. The slander was the hardest part to endure. Family members accused me of seeking attention, destroying my sister's life over a misunderstanding, and repaying years of kindness with cruelty. They claimed they had supported me when no one else would and that I was now stabbing them in the back. Every message, comment, and post was another stab meant to make me feel isolated and powerless. Yet I refused to respond or defend myself in public. I knew that every reaction they got was just fuel for their narrative. Instead, I let my lawyer handle any necessary communication, and I continued to document everything with precision. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crack. Amidst all the chaos, a few distant relatives and old friends reached out privately, sharing their own stories of similar abuse and manipulation. Their support was a lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this battle. Many people live with toxic family dynamics where love is conditional and only extended as long as you keep giving. These messages strengthened my resolve, proving that what I was doing wasn't just right for me, but important for others facing the same struggles. Their words were a balm in the middle of the storm. As the pressure on my family mounted, their attempts to regain control became increasingly aggressive and desperate. They started showing up at my apartment unannounced, pounding on the door, demanding explanations, and begging me to reconsider. My dad warned me that I would regret breaking up the family, insisting that I always came back eventually. But this time was different. I didn't answer the door or return their calls. They wanted to reinstate the old dynamic where I stayed quiet, and they stayed comfortable. That dynamic was dead, and they hated it. Their desperation was proof that I had broken the cycle. One night, my aunt posted publicly on Facebook about the family drama, framing it as heartbreaking but inevitable that the truth would come out because we have receipts. To them, the documents and contracts I had gathered were just receipts to wield against me. I didn't respond to the post or engage in the drama. Silence was my weapon now, cold, surgical, and unyielding. Removing myself quietly from their control forced them to face the consequences without giving them more leverage. They thought they could keep pulling me back with guilt and manipulation, but I had finally learned to say no. Through it all, I kept reminding myself that what I was doing wasn't revenge. It was accountability. It was reclaiming my life after years of being taken for granted and used. I wasn't just cutting ties. I was setting firm boundaries that would protect my future. They had counted on my silence, mistaking it for weakness. But it was patience, waiting for the right moment to stand up and say enough. That moment had arrived. The quiet one had finally found her voice, and she wasn't going anywhere. The fallout from shutting everything down was unlike anything I had imagined, and yet, deep down, I knew it was inevitable. Once the family realized I wasn't going to quietly fix the mess, everything spiraled out of control in ways that left me both stunned and strangely relieved. For the first time, I felt like I was truly free from the financial and emotional chains that had held me captive for so long. But freedom came at a cost, and the price was a painful reckoning that rocked the very foundations of what I once called family. The days after my silent digital lockdown were filled with a relentless barrage of texts, calls, and even visits that I refused to answer. My phone became a war zone of desperate attempts to pull me back in, apologies mixed with threats, and endless emotional manipulation. "You're tearing this family apart," they accused. "We're falling apart because of you." My sister Brooke cried over voicemail messages I never replied to. Yet, beneath the anger and the chaos, I sensed their desperation was real. They were scared, not of losing me, but of losing control. I spent hours with my lawyer, going over every document, every forged signature, and every financial link I had severed. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep the deception went. It wasn't just a car loan or some forgotten bills. It was years of abuse disguised as family support, a toxic cycle where I was expected to be the silent provider without question or complaint. My lawyer advised me on the possibility of civil suits for fraud and defamation, but I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted accountability. I wanted them to understand that crossing certain lines had consequences. At the same time, I began sharing parts of my story, not on Facebook or Instagram, where the drama had already spiraled out of control, but on LinkedIn. I wanted the truth to be heard by people who knew me as a professional, calm, and capable person. I crafted a post titled, "When Family Crosses the Line," a cautionary tale of financial exploitation and identity theft. It was factual, unemotional, and precise. I laid out the timeline, the fraud, and the emotional manipulation without naming names but making it clear to those who needed to know. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the post went viral among my network, garnering thousands of views and messages of support from former colleagues, old classmates, and even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. This unexpected wave of solidarity was a balm for my battered spirit. People shared their own stories of being taken advantage of by family members or toxic relationships, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this struggle. For the first time, I felt seen, not as the problem child or the ungrateful sibling, but as someone reclaiming her dignity and control. The flood of messages gave me strength to keep pushing forward, even as the attacks from my immediate family intensified. Despite the public support, my family refused to back down. They doubled their efforts to silence me, spreading more rumors and trying to control the narrative. My sister's Instagram posts became increasingly dramatic, painting me as the villain and herself as the victim. Friends and acquaintances started asking questions, and the tension grew with every new message or comment. Yet, I stood firm, refusing to be drawn into their chaos. I knew that engaging in online battles would only distract me from what truly mattered, rebuilding my life on my own terms. The turning point came when my family realized legal action was a real possibility. My lawyer had prepared a comprehensive case, detailing the forged contracts, the financial exploitation, and the emotional abuse. I wasn't threatening to sue, but I was ready if they forced the issue. The power dynamic shifted. Suddenly, I was no longer the helpless victim, but someone with the means and the will to hold them accountable. That realization shook them to their core. In the midst of the legal storm, I started to rebuild my personal life. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from during years of family stress. I focused on my career, throwing myself into work with renewed passion and clarity. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. I was no longer defined by the expectations and betrayals of my past, but by the choices I made every day moving forward. There were moments of loneliness and doubt, especially when messages from my family went unanswered or when I saw their posts online. But each time, I reminded myself why I had taken this path: to protect my sanity, my finances, and my soul. The family I once knew was gone, replaced by a web of lies and manipulation, and I was finally free to walk away. Then came the unexpected. One evening, out of the blue, Brooke reached out. Her message was hesitant, full of apologies and admissions of fear and regret. She confessed that she had been pressured into the whole scheme and that she was scared to lose her place in the family. For the first time, I saw a crack in the armor that had held my family together, a glimmer of genuine remorse amid the chaos. Around the same time, news came that Grandma Ruth had disappeared without explanation. No calls, no messages, nothing. Rumors swirled about her health and whereabouts, but no one knew for sure. It was as if the matriarch who had once held so much power in the family was now a ghost, leaving behind a legacy of broken trust and unanswered questions. And just when I thought the dust was settling, the dealership called with a new bombshell. Someone else had surfaced, claiming ownership of the car that had been purchased under my name. This revelation uncovered yet another layer of deceit I hadn't anticipated, forcing me to reconsider how deep this family betrayal really went. That night, I sat by my apartment window, looking out over the city skyline, phone in hand, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I was faced with a choice: dig deeper into this new mystery or finally walk away and reclaim my peace. The silence was no longer a sign of defeat. It was a deliberate choice. The quiet was mine, and it was powerful. I thought the storm had passed. After all the silence, the blocks, the legal warnings, and the cold dismantling of everything they had used to control me, I believed I had finally broken the cycle for good. I didn't expect peace, exactly, but I expected quiet. And for a while, that's exactly what I got. No messages, no surprise visits, no cryptic posts on social media. Just silence. It felt like walking through a house after a fire, burnt, hollow, still standing, but forever changed. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means planning. One Sunday morning, I opened my inbox to find a subject line that made my stomach twist. "Let's talk," from all of us. The email came from a new address I didn't recognize, but I knew immediately who it was. My mother had written it. That much was clear from the tone. Soft, rehearsed, guilt-laced, and wrapped in politeness. She spoke of healing, of misunderstandings, of wanting to rebuild what was lost. She said they were ready to take responsibility, to sit down as a family and address the past like adults. Attached was a document titled "Steps Toward Reconciliation." It was formatted like a business plan. I didn't open it. Instead, I stared at the screen, wondering who they thought I was now. Did they think time had worn me down? That silence had softened me into submission again? That my refusal to speak was just a long tantrum waiting to be soothed? They still didn't understand. I hadn't gone quiet because I was overwhelmed. I went quiet because I was done. 2 days later, they arrived. No warning, no invitation. Just 3 figures on the other side of my door. My mother, my father, and Brooke, all standing there like missionaries of remorse. My mom held a box in her arms like it contained something sacred. My dad stood stiffly, jaw tight, eyes tired. Brooke wore sunglasses, as if grief had suddenly become a fashion statement. "We just want to talk," my dad said. I didn't answer. My mother offered the box with both hands. "Everything is here, the receipts, the car title, the account closures. We're making it right." I let them talk. I stood in the doorway, not to invite them in, but to end it. They said they never meant to hurt me, that they didn't know I felt this way, that they'd been under pressure, that they panicked, that it wasn't malicious, it was just a mistake that spiraled. And like clockwork, Brooke finally spoke. "We were a family once, before all this." All this. She meant my boundaries. She meant the part where I refused to be their silent sponsor anymore. She meant the truth. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. I looked at my dad and said, "You didn't lose a car. You lost the right to ask." I turned to my mom. "You didn't lose a son. You lost your silent shield." Then to Brooke. I had to redefine what I could give. They stood there waiting for the crack in my voice, for the apology, for the moment where I'd fold and say, "But you're still my family." I didn't. Instead, I said, "There's no going back. Not because I hate you. Because I finally like myself too much to crawl back into that cage." My mother whispered, "So this is it?" I nodded. No speech. No drama. Just truth. They walked away. No tears. No yelling. just the quiet click of the car doors shutting behind them. I didn't watch them drive off. I didn't wait for them to turn around. I went back inside, made myself coffee, and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where the folder first landed, the one that had quietly ruined everything and finally set me free. But it wasn't over. Not completely. A week later, I received another email, this time from an unfamiliar law firm. My parents had filed a preemptive motion, claiming that if I made any further public accusations, they would pursue legal action for defamation. They were scared, not of lies, but of truths made permanent. I forwarded it to my lawyer. He replied with one sentence, "Let them try." I never posted about it again. I didn't need to. The damage they did lived in documents and dates. The repair I did lived in boundaries and absence. Months passed. I moved to a new apartment, changed my number, switched banks, set new roots in new soil. I stopped expecting apologies and started enjoying quiet mornings. I finally felt like I was living for myself, not for the idea of being useful to people who only saw my value in what I could provide. Then, one late evening, I received a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Ellie, a cousin I'd grown up with but lost touch with. Her message was short but heavy. I saw everything. You were right. I'm sorry. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit. For the first time in my life, I felt no urgency to fix, reply, explain, or comfort. That was the ending. Not with a bang, not with a fight. With a door that stayed closed. With a voice that didn't waver. With a silence they no longer owned.